Hey everybody, Andrew McFarlane here. I'm here with Brandon Burgert again, and we are going to be talking some technical details about the Krieghoff part of the equation. And I'm going to hand you over to Brandon in a second, and he's going to walk through all the details that he's garnered over the last couple of weeks as we've been going through this process of getting these guns to match each other in the end. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you off to Brandon, and he'll let us know a little bit more about what he's found.
All right, thank you, Andrew. What we're going to do today is talk to you guys about the technical measurements and specifications that we've found in the Krieghoff that has now been fitted to me. So we're actually going to go through a lot of the details that Andrew goes through when he does a fitting and what those measurements actually look like in finite numbers. Yeah. So the first thing I want to talk about is the stock of the Krieghoff here. And so when you're doing a fitting, some of the initial measurements you're going to get are the drop at not only the heel, which is the back of the stock, and then the face. And that face term you'll hear a lot throughout this series, and that's where your face will actually sit on the stock. So when we did the measurements, we have found that I actually have, from the comb of the barrel and the top of the receiver right here, it's found that at the heel of the gun, it's actually a 2-inch drop. So what that means is from the rib of the gun all the way down to where it touches the pad here is 2 inches. Now, where my face actually sits on this stock, it's actually 1 inch and 9/16. So my face usually sits right about here on the stock, so that measurement is 1 inch and 9/16. So it's a little bit different, but we'll get into what the pitch of the stock means later on, and so those numbers are critical numbers when you're measuring yourself for your stock fit. So now we're going to get to the part where it's called cast on and cast off, and that is the portion of where the heel of the stock in terms of the face sits out or in, and that's going to be based on if you're right or left-handed, and also some of your physiology, because there are some right-handed shooters that can be cast on or cast off. It all just depends on your body type. All right, everyone, so we're now going to get to the portion of talking about the cast measurements of my specific stock here. So basically from the face all the way to the heel of the gun, I am a 1/2 inch cast off. So I'm a right-handed shooter, so typically you're going to be talking in terms of cast off, which means that the stock will be moved this way. So at the face where I sit, my face at the gun, I am a 1/4 inch cast off. So again, as we had talked about earlier, the measurement where your face actually sits on the gun versus the heel of the gun will be slightly different as it moves down the stock. And that one I'm actually a 1/4 inch cast off as well. So a little bit different. Those are not crazy measurements in Andrew's opinion that he has told me. But again, we wanted to give you guys a bunch of finite details on what those actually mean. So now we're going to get into a little bit, I know we had talked in the first part about some of the improvements that I want to make to this stock, and we're going to get into that portion of those measurements now. So actually at the neck, we've taken a caliper that's sitting in front of us here, and we've done a lot of different measurements all the way down the body of the stock. And the reason that we're doing that is we're going to compare the differences between this gun and the stock that he's already made me for my Guerini, and then we are going to start taking some of the measurements from the Guerini and some of the other measurements that are here on this stock, combine them together into the perfect stock that I want.
Yep.
So if you're going to look here, we'll take a look at the neck. We measured that at 1.269 inches, and I will say that this is going to be one of the biggest things that I change. It's very thin for my hands up here at the top, and so we will be expanding that measurement when we go to my custom stock. The next portion we want to talk about is a lot of people, when they do a custom stock, have a palm swell, and it's very specific to the types of hands you have, the feel you want in the gun. This one also is very thin at that portion as well. It comes in at 1.535 inches. So fairly thin through here, as you guys can see on the camera, but that will be changing as we go to my custom stock. All right, guys, and as we move down from the palm swell, we're going to start talking about the thickness of the comb. And that's going to be another big thing that's going to change from the stock dimensions of the factory stock here to my custom stock. And even in the current custom stock that I have, it's much thicker, and so it's got a much better feeling on my cheek. So as we go to that, we wanted to get some finite numbers for you guys to actually let you know what that's going to mean. So right now at the heel, again here at the back of the stock, it is a 1.457 inches thick, so that would be right here for that measurement. And again, where my face sits on the stock also, it's actually a little thinner, and that's something that I really don't actually care for, because I'll find that my cheek will roll over on the gun some, and so we're going to rectify that as we make the custom stock.
Absolutely.
And that came in at a 1.3 inch width. And then the final measurement that we're going to talk to you guys about this stock is what's called pitch. And so that will be measured here, and it is actually at 4.5 degrees pitched down. And Andrew will be able to explain a little bit more of that future in the series. If you guys have any more specific questions, reach out to Salou. You can get a much better explanation of what that actually means in terms of the stock and for the overall fit. So I'm going to hand it back over to Andrew a little bit to kind of wrap it up with some of the measurements and some of the things that he's found with some of this as well.
I will set the gun up in such a way that you use the very least amount of energy possible to go through your shooting foray, which means from the gun in its down position all the way to your fully mounted system. We want that to be completely repeatable, and if you bring work into the system, then it fails you. So the whole philosophy is that the human's relationship or interaction with the gun is with the very least amount of energy possible, very least amount of pressure contacted with the face and the hands and so on and so forth. So very quickly, let's talk about this. The top of the stock is called the comb. The rear of the stock at the top here is called the heel. The bottom of the butt is called the toe. And so when we talk about these things, we'll discuss what we're doing and how we're going to adjust it to get this, what Brandon needs out of this. But at least now you'll know what we're talking about when we talk about this. Now, Brandon did talk about the pitch. There is one point I do want to touch on, and that's the pitch. This is an important part of the physiology of the shotgun, because what it does and only does is to control how the gun behaves under recoil. So if we have too much pitch up, which would be this direction here, what would happen is under recoil the stock would dive and it would shoot out of the shoulder, and the shooter would have to remount every time they shot the gun. Well, that's not going to work. Go the opposite now, where you go to pitch down, and now what happens is it moves upwards and smacks the shooter in the face and all kinds of other things. Even if it wasn't causing pain or discomfort, it's still going to make you inconsistent from shot to shot, because your gun's going to be different. So we set this up to each individual shooter so that what happens is when the gun is used normally and under firing conditions, as much as possible goes back in a straight rearward, back and forward line. This allows the shooter to transition from bird to bird as quickly as possible, as smoothly as possible, with the least amount of error. So that's about it then. We will talk about palm swells. I do want to say something about the palm swell, actually. The palm swell is a personal thing. Nobody has to have a palm swell. If you want one because you feel you need it, we can set it up. And so I'll touch a little bit on what Brandon said. It's what the palm swell is for is to make sure that your hand goes back to exactly the same grip every single time. So what we call the peak of the palm swell, which is the highest point, sits exactly in the center part of your palm, so that your brain and everything else that's going on there will identify very, very quickly if your hand is slightly up or slightly down and not in that perfect position. All right? So it's just another way that we can institute something into the firearm itself to make sure the human, which is the biggest problem, can do their job the very best way. So palm swell, if you want one, that's fine. If you don't want one, that's fine too. It doesn't matter. But what it can do if you want to use it is it's just another added safety barrier to make sure that you're doing the same thing every time. So that peak will change depending whether you've got a small hand like mine or whether you've got a big old hand like Brandon. This will change, and it's all about making sure your hand is correctly set up on the gun so you don't have too much aggression with your skeletal system. And the other thing too is that you have the correct distance from your finger to the trigger. So there's no reach, there's no stress, there's no work. It just becomes a natural go-to every single time. So that's why the palm swell is there. Again, I'll reiterate, you don't have to have a palm swell, but if you do, it's extremely important that you have it set up correctly for you. Otherwise, it'll cause you more problems than good. So I think that's about all the technical stuff I want to talk about right now. We will discuss more later, obviously, you know, as we come up, but at least now you understand a little bit more about what's happening. Last thing I will talk about really quickly is the cast. The cast is denoted, as Brandon said, cast on for left-hander, cast off for right-hander. What its job is to do is to make sure that the barrels, not the stock, the barrels are a perfect extension of your leading eye. How we do that is we manipulate the stock, and how I do it under my process using my machines is I bend the stock at the wrist here, which is pretty much where everybody else does. And in fact, we are actually bending the wood, but in reality, we're not. This doesn't change. You, the shooter, will bring it back to the same thing you have going on when you bring the gun up, bring it down, bring it back up again. What I'm doing is I'm bringing the barrels to you. The whole point about adding cast to a stock is to make sure that the barrels are an extension of the eye without the shooter having to be aggressive and having to force their way onto the stock or over the stock or whatever. Again, these are the biggest problems I see. The minute you give the shooting individual relaxation and calmness, all of a sudden with this, consistency is achieved and the performance downrange comes back to you. So that's about all I need to talk about right now. We will talk about more stuff as we go from here. We haven't discussed grip angles or anything like that yet. We'll get to that. So anyway, thank you very much. Take care.